I will reconvene the August 9th Board of Supervisors meeting for our work session today. Opening board, present are all board members. To my far right, Mr. Clay Forehand from Madison. Next to him, Mr. Jeff Black from Western Carolina. To my right, Mr. Jeff Seeley from Bowling Green. To my left, Ms. Nancy Long from Port Royal. To the far left is Mr. Floyd Thomas from Mattapanai, and I'm Reggie Underwood from the Reedy Church District. Opening board comments, Mr. Forehand?
None at this time, sir.
Thank you. Mr. Black?
Yeah, I just have one. I don't know if Mr. Parton can look into it. I just had a concern. Actually, I had a constituent call me, and then it happened kind of in our own household, and it's the principle of the thing. You know, one of the things that's a requirement of a citizen, a civic requirement, is to do jury duty, and I think that's always very, very important for anyone to do. And I think we are setting up questionnaires to our citizens in regards to, jury duty. And if you're going to require someone, there's no return postage. We're asking the citizens to pay the 50 cents for the stamp. It's like, here, it's kind of a requirement. And then, hey, you have to pay to return the envelope. So if there's a way we can look into that as to why there's not like where the county is not paying for that, for them to return the information.
That's a court system, not the county.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, but I mean, if we could talk to them though and get an answer as to why that's happening, because in the end, we're funding the courts. So
they're pretty independent. They give us, okay, we can do that. We'll have staff take a look at that.
I just don't think it's something the citizens should have to incur the cost of.
Okay.
That's all.
Thank you. Mr. Seeley.
I have none, Mr. Underwood.
Mrs. Long.
I have none.
Thank you, Mrs. Long. Mr. Thomas.
None.
And I have none as well. First item on the agenda is a presentation of the impact on groundwater management area on the Milford and Poorhouse done by DEQ.
Mr. Underwood.
Good evening, Mr. Shebel.
Good evening, sir. I don't have much volume here. Can you hear me okay? Testing.
Yeah.
I don't know about the people in the back, but
I can't hear myself either, so I figured you couldn't hear me. Good evening. Tonight we've got a presentation from DEQ. We've invited them tonight to update the board on the groundwater management area. And with us tonight is Mr. Scott Cudless, who's going to review that with you. And they were with the town about 2.5 months ago and did a great job there. And I know this will be very informative for you. So, okay.
Thank you, Joey. Is this really on? Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Thank you for the opportunity to come and present to you tonight. So my name is Scott Cudless. I'm the director of the Office of Water Supply at Virginia DEQ, and managing the groundwater resources of the Commonwealth is one of my responsibilities in that role. So I hope to impart some information about your location, how groundwater is impacted by withdrawals in your location, and what that may mean for you going forward in the future. Is that going to be on? You'll turn it on? Okay. So while they're doing that, I'm going to start out with a little bit of hydrogeology 101 for you. All right, there we go. Okay, all right. So you can go to the next slide then. And I have Eric Seavey, who is one of our permit writers, in case we get into particular questions about your existing permits. All right, next slide. All right, so we're going to start with our groundwater 101 lesson here. The area that we currently regulate under the Virginia Groundwater Management Act of 1992 is the area that is shown here in yellow. That is our coastal plain geologic province, and that is the area that has shown the greatest impact from groundwater use over the last 70 years. We have two different management areas. We have on the mainland portion there between the Chesapeake Bay and Interstate 95, which kind of follows the western edge of that yellow portion there. That is our Eastern Virginia groundwater management area where you're located. And then we have a separate groundwater management area on the eastern shore because that aquifer system there, while it is connected, for all intents and purposes kind of functions as its own separate unit. So, we have kind of a dividing line there between the yellow and the green. On the yellow, we have our coastal ocean and river deposited aquifer system, and I'll get into a little bit more detail on that later. And then heading west from the green to the purples and the blue, those are what we call our fractured rock systems. And so the aquifers there are basically cracks in the rock that hold water. The two systems function largely independently. So those are the kind of teaching points I'd like to make on this slide so we can move on to the next one. Okay, so when we talk about an aquifer, what are we really talking about? Got it work? Okay. The kind of definition that everybody plays with who kind of does this work is that it's a body of porous rock or sediment saturated with water, with groundwater. And if you think about what I was just talking about earlier, the area toward the west of Interstate 95 is an area that's comprised of these fractured rocks areas where we have cracks in the rock that are filled with water. And then the area in the coastal plain where you're located, we have these layers of either sand and gravel or marine sediments that have been deposited over time. And in between the pore spaces, you have your groundwater. And basically, if you were to drill down there and take a look at it, it looks like a bunch of wet sand or a bunch of wet gravel. It's not an underground river or anything like that. So that's the kind of system that we're looking at, and this will become a little bit more important in the next slide, where we'll show you some more pictures. So next slide. Oh, I can do it. Sorry. So as I was saying, in the coastal plain, in that yellow area from the first map, the ocean over millions of years deposited marine sediments, and that's when the ocean got closer and closer to Interstate 95. And when the ocean receded and went back further east as far as the eastern edge of the eastern shore, the river systems within that portion of the state deposited coarser gravels and sands. And those are what we call our fluvial sediments or riverine sediments. The aquifer that is the favorite aquifer for most well drillers is going to be the Potomac aquifer. And that is that lowest aquifer that sits on the bedrock that is primarily made up of those riverine deposits. That makes it the most productive and the highest quality groundwater within that coastal plain system. Above that, where those marine sediments were deposited, we have other aquifers with other names, the Yorktown Eastover, the Piney Point, the Aquia, and some of those in different parts of the coastal plain have decent water quality and can provide a reasonable yield. But in most cases, the water quality is just not as suitable for potable supply or a supply that needs minimal treatment. And so that's why the Potomac aquifer is the highest used aquifer in that system. And because it's the highest used aquifer, it's the one that has the most stress on it.
What depths are we talking about?
Well, as you can see here, and I'll show you another picture, as you go from west to east, you basically have like a triangle on its side. So it's very shallow along Interstate 95, and then it gets thicker and thicker the closer you get toward the Chesapeake Bay. And in your area, it can be as much as, 60 to 80 feet thick to as much as maybe 100 to 200 feet thick. You get into Hampton Roads and it's 3,000 feet thick. So it's dramatically different. And that's why the use that occurs in that aquifer system shows up first in the shallower parts of the aquifer. Okay, so after 70 years of USGS and DEQ study of the aquifer system, we can come up with this nice little cartoon. We call it our conceptual model, but after hundreds of core samples that we've taken of these aquifer sediments, this is how we characterize the system and how we explain how it functions. So I'm going to orient you first. Right here is Interstate 95. You guys are, right here at the very feather edge. Right here is the coast of the Chesapeake Bay. And then, the eastern shore is off this actual picture. And so here, what we have is that Potomac aquifer, which is really large and productive. We have these marine deposits. And because these marine deposits are really, really fine grained and include a lot of silts and clays, they act as what we call confining units. And so they help separate the different aquifers, but they're not hermetically sealed by these different units that separate them. They are leaky. And so what you can see here is the groundwater can go across these different confining units into these other aquifers. The water can actually go up and down depending on what the differences in pressure is between the two. And the pressure changes because of withdrawals from wells. Okay. Over time, historically, pre-development, groundwater always flowed from west to east and into the Chesapeake Bay and the Atlantic Ocean, albeit it went really, really slowly. And when I say slowly, tenths of inches per year generally, unless it's being influenced by pumping. And the same holds true for recharge. Recharge happens really, really slowly. So on an average year in Virginia, we get 44, 45 inches of rain. 1/10 of 1 inch actually will reach the Potomac aquifer from a normal year of rainfall. So there's 90 million gallons a day coming out of the system. 1/10 of 1 inch doesn't help you very, very quickly. So the other thing I wanted to point out is we have what we call our saltwater interface. This is where saltier water from the ocean and the Chesapeake Bay, because of pumping, has started to move inland. And then this large blob here is the Chesapeake Bay impact crater. One of the largest meteor impacts, I think it's the second largest meteor impact in the world, occurred at the mouth of the Chesapeake Bay and has a significant impact now in impeding flow in certain portions of the aquifer system. Okay. There are some other geologic factors that impact how water moves through the system closer to you all. And what this depicts here is a study that was conducted by the USGS to use certain equipment, radar type equipment, to identify where the different faults were within the aquifer system. Those of you who experienced the Louisa earthquake a few years back may remember that. In your area here, right around Bowling Green, you have several major fault lines, and that does have some impact on the way the groundwater flows within the system. Okay, so now we're getting closer to the punchline. So all but one of these hydrographs represent the measurement of water levels within the Potomac aquifer since about 1970. Some of these were slightly earlier than 1970, and some of these were slightly later than 1970, all within the 70s, with the exception of this particular graphic here. And what this represents is how water levels have declined from current use. And so what you can see is if this was your bank account, you would probably not be very happy with its performance because it's been going down throughout the system for a very long time. It's basically been trending that way since about the end of World War II, when there was an industrial boom as well as a residential housing boom, and that significant increase in groundwater withdrawals led to these declines. So there are a few good signs here, and I guess what I would point out is that so in your area, you're still pretty much on the decline, but there are some areas closer. You may have heard that in 2017, the 14 largest groundwater users had their permits reduced by, on average, 50%. And what you can see here is that as a result of that reduction in withdrawals, things are starting to level out a little bit. So we're starting to see even a little bit of an uptick. So that's good news. Now, the news that's not so good is the amount of time that it took us to decline, getting back up to a level that's more sustainable will take not quite as long, but nearly as long. So if it took us 60 years to get this way, it may take us another 30 years to get back to where we need to be. Okay. So this one here is the only one that kind of sticks out as unusual. There's this big jump. And what that big jump is that's what happened when they turned the pumps off at the paper mill in Franklin. So that was 32 million gallons a day coming out of there. And then when they went from 32 to 16, you can see it leveled off and didn't continue to jump up. Okay. So next slide. So as I said, we've seen those declines for a long time. And in 1956, the General Assembly stepped in with its first statutory change to direct, at that point in time, the State Water Control Board to start regulating groundwater withdrawals in the coastal plain. The first regulation was directed at trying to address the loss of the artesian characteristics that existed prior to 1956 and that were largely eliminated between the end of World War II and the 1950s from that growth in withdrawals that I talked about. And so that was the well capping law of 1956. That didn't really stop the declines. And so by 1973, the General Assembly instituted the first permitting program. So that program was in place in a small area of southeastern Virginia. It continued to get expanded, and it originally applied only to industrial withdrawals. And then by 1992, it covered about 2/3 of eastern Virginia and the Eastern Shore under permitting program, and it covered all different types of groundwater withdrawals. So it actually got to the point where it included public water supplies, agriculture, and industrial as well. So under that Groundwater Management Act of 1992, which is the one that's still in place, its objective is to regulate the withdrawal of groundwater to ensure that we preserve for the future a sustainable resource. So that when we issue a permit, that person who receives that permit has a reasonable expectation that they're going to be able to withdraw that amount for, say, the next 30 years. That's what they want to be able to accomplish. Right now, with the water levels where they are, we're lucky if we can guarantee that for 15. So that's kind of where we are right now. And so the objectives there are to reverse the change that's occurred in the hydraulic gradient. And that's a fancy way of saying, when I was talking earlier, where the groundwater used to flow from west to east, now it flows toward the pumping centers. So it flows inland from Chesapeake Bay. It still goes from west to east from the fall line for the most part, but we're seeing that salt water move inland, okay? We're also trying to manage the decline in water levels because as those water levels continue to drop, it begins to dewater the aquifer. And when the aquifer is dewatered, those spaces that used to hold water compress, and then you see land subsidence, compaction of the aquifer, and when that happens, you can't recharge it. So that's what we're trying to avoid through this regulation. So under this program, who needs to get a permit? Well, the permit is based on volume, the threshold for getting a permit, and that's 300,000 gallons in any single month. So if you're an agricultural withdrawal and you irrigate only in the summertime, if you go over 300,000 gallons in one of those months, then you have to get a permit. And that permit will be in place for the next 15 years. Also, just to kind of give you a sense of scale, 300,000 gallons really isn't a whole lot of water. Depending on the size of the home, it's 20 to 30 single-family homes. It's operating 125 gallon per minute well for 40 hours. It's the equivalent of an 18-hole golf course. So there's a lot of different activities fall under regulation. We have approximately 500 regulated activities right now. So
Mr. Cummings, who manages that or monitors that?
We do.
And I'm really loud. How do you know in my particular farm that I've used 300,000 gallons?
The only way that I know is if you have been complying with another state law that requires you to report your withdrawal every year. So if you're not doing that, then I wouldn't know. But if you are doing that, then I would know. The other thing that happens is that as elected representatives, you're probably well aware of neighbors telling on other neighbors. that is another way that we find out about withdrawals. But do we have them all? No.
Yeah, you don't have a meter at each farm, and you don't have a meter at all the other places.
For every activity that has a permit, they're required to have a meter, but everybody else is not. Okay. There is an exemption in the statute and regulation for certain mining activities that are regulated by what's now called our Department of Energy. It used to be Department of Mines, Minerals, and Energy. And there are generally an exclusion or an exemption for individual single-family private wells. Now, there is one caveat to that, and I'll get into that in the next slide. Whoops, went too fast. There is a section of the regulation that was adopted in 2018, that the General Assembly passed a law that any subdivision in a groundwater management area for 30 or more lots that are served by private wells has to apply to DEQ to have a modeling analysis done. And what that analysis is supposed to do is it's supposed to give the developer a recommendation, and if the locality wants to be aware, DEQ makes a recommendation on what aquifer is the most sustainable to meet that need. There's an application fee that covers the cost of the modeling contractor that we have, and there is some information that they have to collect from a well bore on site in order for us to do that evaluation. That is a non-binding recommendation, so the developer can take it or leave it. But if the developer doesn't abide by it, then there's a mitigation agreement that he has to record that if any of the neighboring properties has a problem with an individual well, that they're then responsible for making that landowner's well whole again. So that's kind of the carrot and the stick here. And so that is a new activity. Before, all private wells, no matter what the size of the subdivision was, were excluded from that statute. So I'm going to introduce two new terms that I haven't covered before, and these are what will apply in any evaluation related to your existing user permits. So the first term is what we call our 80% drawdown criteria. And that is our aquifer protection metric. And what it does is it says that under this permitting program, DEQ is allowed to allocate up to 80% of the groundwater in any individual aquifer. Once you reach that 20% margin of safety, then DEQ can't issue any more permits that cause that to get worse.
Yeah, he's down there.
Okay? So that's what we call our 80% drawdown criteria. In certain locations, that water level is already below that. And so those areas are identified as our critical cells. That means that the water level is already below that level. Okay, so critical cell, that's an area where the groundwater currently, or as a result of the modeling evaluation, says that this new withdrawal will pull the aquifer down below that elevation that we're supposed to maintain. There's something called the cone of depression. If you took geology in high school or in college, you would have heard this. It's basically when you pump a well, you pull the water level down in the aquifer. There's also on the land surface a geographic area where we identify where that cone of depression pulls the aquifer down by a foot or more from each individual well. Okay, and we use that as a metric to evaluate what wells, primarily, what wells that exists today might be impacted by this new withdrawal. Okay? So I'm going to give you a couple of pictures to kind of walk you through how that works. So here's the land surface. Here's the confined aquifer that all of these wells are withdrawing from. We measure the distance from the land surface to the top of that aquifer, and then we divide that into 80% and 20%, and that elevation represents the line where we want all the water levels in the well to stay above from the beginning and after the model simulation period of 50 years. So we start with the current water level. We do our modeling analysis that tells us where the water level is going to be after pumping for 50 years. And we want to be sure that it stays above here. If the modeling tells us that it's down below this 20% line, then we have to say, no, we can't issue that permit. Okay. All right. So you saw that layer cake of all those different aquifers vertically laying on top of each other from basement to land surface. These are all the critical cells combined for all of those different aquifers. So here you are. So there's a whole lot of places where new permits can't be issued. Okay? So let's go to the Potomac Aquifer because this is the one that I believe you all are probably in. As you can see here, this area is really bad. Thankfully, it's far south of you. The area just east of Richmond is not particularly good. The area around King George is not particularly good. You guys have one critical cell here, which is not far from Bowling Green, about 8 miles, 9 miles. And then you have a few that are north of you. And as you can see, as I said earlier, along this shallowest part of the aquifer is where you see the impacts first from all the use that occurs in the entire coastal plain. All right, so let's go back to the area of impact. So the area of impact, this is the cone of depression. This line here is where that cone of depression draws the aquifer down by 1 foot if this is the starting water level. This is the well that's seeking permitting. And if this well here, this well is in the same aquifer, it will follow, the water level in that well will follow the cone of depression created by this well. So as you can see here, it doesn't in this particular well, and that's because it's taking water from the aquifer above it. So this area here, from 1 foot of thickness in the cone of depression, and this area here, this is the area we will draw on the map that shows what the area of impact is. And that area of impact is used for 2 things. The first is, if you are well A, if your water level drops to the point where maybe your pump goes dry and you burn out your pump, this well user is technically financially responsible for fixing this guy's well. He's not for this guy because he's not in the same aquifer, even though it's within the area of impact. And he's not for this guy because even though he's in the same aquifer, he's not in the area of impact. Okay? So you have to be both. You have to be within this area of impact and from the same aquifer. Okay? Then there's a responsibility from each new user to those existing users. Okay? So the statute is written in such a way that when you become a part of a groundwater management area, every existing withdrawal within that management area at the time that it's added or created gets a permit based on the historic use that you have, the largest consecutive 12 months of use that you can document. There's no other evaluation really with it. There's no evaluation using the model. There's no determination of whether or not that's the minimum amount of water to meet the need. None of those things occur. So it's basically a bridge permit to get you in position so that when that expires, you have expended the money, gathered the data, and gotten your house in order so that when you apply, you have everything that you need for that evaluation to take place. So, whoops. So your new permit, you'll have that technical evaluation with the model. You'll have that mitigation responsibility to any existing users within your area of impact. You'll have a water conservation and management plan. In order to be ready to do this, you're going to have to collect some geotechnical information. So you're going to probably have to drill a borehole. You're going to have to run a probe down it so that we know exactly which aquifer that well is pulling from. You'll also have to confirm that your pump is above the top of the aquifer so that it doesn't dewater the aquifer. Okay. So these are the particulars. You have a permit right now that allows you until 2026 to keep that amount. If you want to expand it, then you immediately have to produce the data necessary to do the technical evaluation.
But we don't have to do that unless we want to expand.
Unless you want to expand or unless you want to maintain that permit going forward. You would, if you wanted to expand and you wanted to do that before the permit expired, then you'd have to do it right away.
Okay, we don't want to do anything. We just want to keep it the way it is.
Okay.
We still have to do the bottom part after 26.
By 26.
By 26.
Yeah, so that you can submit it with your permit application.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. So that gives you a little bit of time to spread out the cost. Same with this one, same period of time. Actually, pretty small amounts of water, but in a minute you'll see here. This is kind of what your current use reported has been and what percentage of your permit is. So, and this is maybe information that you already know, over the last 4 years, you've increased your withdrawal. And at this point, you're around 82% of the permit of actual use. So you don't have much cushion in it. Okay, so I wanted to give you a little bit of a sense of what that modeling evaluation is going to mean to you. I have not actually run the model, so this is experience-based eyeballing it from my perspective. And unfortunately, after 20 years of this, I'm getting better than I want to be at it. So just to give you a sense, at your current amount, you guys are looking at an area of impact probably about that size. So where it would be very problematic is if it turned out to be big enough to hit this square. If you intersect with this square, then I have to say, no, I can't reissue it at that amount. You can try to reduce it and we can rerun the model, or you can find an alternative source of supply. So those are the options that I have to provide you, and that's kind of what you're looking at. So what the take-home message is you don't have much growth here because Your current permit is what? Let me be sure I get the numbers right. It's not even 0.1 MGD, right? So, if you were to need an MGD, your area of impact would probably go up this high. So you would intersect probably all three of these cells and maybe a couple of the cells in King George. So, for the long term, expanding your groundwater capacity is probably not a viable option for you in a practical sense, at least in the short term. Now, maybe toward the end of 2030 or early 2040, it might be, but I don't see that helps you much with the challenges that I presume you face in your community right now. So your best option then is going to be surface water and probably from the Rappahannock River. Ideally, I think you would want to be looking at partnering with some of your other communities. King George has probably a worse situation than you have, so they certainly would be looking. I would anticipate that Bowling Green, we had a conversation with them. They're kind of in the same boat that you are. Port Royal will be in a similar situation. So, I guess one could say misery loves company, but having a regional solution or a multi-jurisdictional solution makes it more possible that in the short term you're going to be able to promote economic development and do the kinds of things I know you want to do in your community. So I've got one more slide I want to show you. So this Bowling Green's a little bit more. This is actual modeled results. This is, well, let me see what they're at. They're at 0.2 MGD, so not even 500,000 gallons a day. And they're right close to the edge of that critical cell. So that's a situation you face. You can probably maintain what you have, but it'll be determined by the modeling. The other thing that you need to think about, and the reason that I would hedge my bet a little bit about that, is that you have 125 other people with permits like yours, including a whole probably maybe 10 in King George that already have higher existing withdrawals. So there may end up actually being more critical cells because none of those permits has been modeled. So that's what I was here to talk with you about today. I hope that was helpful. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have. And if you don't have any questions, thank you for the opportunity and appreciate your time.
I got questions, but he raised his hand first, so.
Mr. Black.
I just, looking at the map you have here, the very western part of our county, which is what I represent, probably about 90% of Caroline is located, I guess, in the coastal plain. Yes. What about the area of biggest impact in the county where the biggest growth is really west of I-95? Uh-huh. So that little chunk of white in Caroline there on this map, right, is where our highest growth is. Pendleton, Ladysmith Village, Lake Landor, Lake Caroline. Those are your kind of high growth areas. And I was wondering if you had any reports on, because some of these areas are right at 95 and probably closer to some of the other areas. Do you have any data on, I guess we would be in that Piedmont now if you're going over into that, right, area. So is there any numbers on what the wells there? I mean, I know there's high stress from all the development that's going there, but I don't see any data on that one.
Well, we don't have as much data because it's not regulated. So west of 95, you can put a well in wherever you want, and there's no limit on what you can withdraw. So you could certainly investigate that possibility. The fundamental thing that you would be starting out having to deal with is that drilling a well in fractured rock is very hit or miss. You have to find a high yielding fracture. So you have to get lucky. And the trouble is that those fractures are, believe it or not as high yielding as the coastal plain. So while you might be able to come up with a well or series of wells that can help meet your immediate development needs there,
Sure.
the long-term sustainability of those fractured rock wells actually may be less than in the coastal plain. The other challenge that you sometimes can run into is that well drillers, after a while, figure out where those fractures are, and they put everybody's well into that fracture. And then what happens is all of a sudden, a well that was yielding X number of gallons per minute suddenly drops off. And because you don't have a regulated system there, nobody has any protection. So it's kind of the Wild West. And if you look at like Western Prince William, that's kind of the thing that you'll see up there. But it may be an option to explore, and it may be cost effective for you to do that. But that would be something you would want to do with professional consultation services.
I'm just thinking in terms of like the time. I mean, because a lot of this permitting for withdrawals from, I don't think that pulling from the Rappahannock River, while it's, I think that's a long-term solution. It's also very, very expensive for us.
Yeah.
And even with other jurisdictions, because our growth area is not anywhere near the Rappahannock River.
Understand.
And so, I mean, our growth area is a long ways away from where the Rappahannock is. So that's,
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Sure. So if you didn't take from my answer, it's kind of figuring out what your different alternatives are and trying to find out a set of combinations that bridge the gap to whatever your long-term water source will be.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes, appreciate it. Mr. Cudlis, I want to first of all thank you for being here. This was very informative, and I had no idea that there was a Chesapeake Bay crater until you said that tonight, and I appreciate that. The questions I had are kind of for the board, not necessarily. You mentioned the high school track and the Milford system. Both of those are not big development systems. And I guess what you're telling us indirectly is we probably need to limit development in that area because we can't expand the water system. You're not telling us that directly, but you're telling us that indirectly.
Well, what I would be directly telling you is that you need to probably be looking at alternative sources in order to meet your development needs.
Now, which gets me to the next question is, if there is a development, since you mentioned the cone of impact and the people who are affected, we should build into our ordinances where a developer comes and expands that if they pull water, they're responsible for the people outside of that?
Well, I mean, that would be something you could investigate. You might want the advice of counsel before you do that. That would be a part of any of our permits. But if you wanted to use that as a model to have a conversation with your planning director and council, certainly you could look at that.
Yeah, you're saying yes without saying yes. What you said is we would be responsible for any impacts, and we, I guess, as the end result would be the county, right?
So you mean with those two particular systems?
Yes.
Yes, I mean that would be the case. Yeah, under any permit that you would maintain over time, you would have that rebuttable presumption that you're responsible for any, degradation in their ability to withdraw water.
And we would be the county.
Yeah.
And I guess I think indemnification is the right word, to put it back on the developer. So we have to do something in that sense to make sure we're not caught out. All right, I think that was it. Again, the Carmel Church system is still east of 95, so it's in the same boat. You didn't mention that at all. Was that something?
No. Yeah,
So it is considered west of 95?
well, remember, west is, 95 is just kind of a rule of thumb. The coastal plain edge kind of does this.
Okay,
So you could be east of 95, but still in the Piedmont.
which is why we've had a couple of hit or miss wells.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Mr. Seeley?
Thank you for coming this evening. One of the questions that I have is that even if we were to go to surface water, are there localities that still use groundwater intermittently with those systems?
Yes.
So it is still sort of a requirement that we'll need some groundwater even if we do a surface water take.
Well, I mean, that would depend on whatever, terms you negotiate for your surface water allocation. I mean, if you were going to share it, maybe I'm misunderstanding.
We're not, I guess my point is we don't lose our groundwater allocation even if we go to surface water because our reliance is less. So we'd still have that ability to fall back on that
You
at
would
times of the year.
Correct. And we have a fancy name for that. We call that a conjunctive system. There are a number of them in the coastal plain, maybe 20. So it's not uncommon. The only thing that you would need to keep in mind is that as your growth happens, and to the extent that it's being met by surface water, you would still need to justify each time your groundwater permit comes up for renewal that you still need that groundwater. Now, that doesn't mean you can't do that. Many people are able to still make that justification, but you'd have to go through that hoop.
So it was something we'd have to, as a utility, monitor to make sure we're making some draw on that to keep that usage to some level so we don't lose it.
Exactly.
That I guess that was my point, is that we have to do something to keep it. We just don't automatically get it.
Right. You can't just hold in reserve and not use it at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
One other, you talked a little bit about salinity creeping into the aquifer. Can you talk a little bit more about that? How far away from us is that?
Well, it's pretty far from you guys. One of the challenges let me start over. The saltwater interface is primarily along the edge of the Chesapeake Bay impact crater, and then if you were to look at a line from about Hampton through Chesapeake, that's about where the interface is at the lowest portion of the Potomac Aquifer right now. However, the thing that I was going to say for you all, depending on how climate change works, we're starting to see that saltwater wedge move farther and farther up the Rappahannock. So to the extent that saltwater wedge is more frequently seen at the Rappahannock, increases in groundwater withdrawal could pull that into the aquifer system from the river.
Okay, because that was my question. Is it far enough away from us that we're so far inland it doesn't matter?
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily the case.
I think you would have to see substantially more withdrawal in groundwater to see that. So I think you have a long period of a long margin of safety, if I were to say it that way. But it is still possible.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I think you probably would, because I think there's with the program there's going to be kind of this cap on groundwater for a while, And so I don't see groundwater withdrawals reaching the level that I would expect there to result in that lateral movement of any riverine water into the system.
So so I guess the question is, are we at our max with the groundwater allocation we have? Is that our, so to speak, high water mark, and it goes backwards from there?
For now.
High water mark.
You know, a lot will depend on what happens in King George. If King George is able to come off of groundwater and to go on to surface water, at the end of the permit for West Rock Paper Company, they will be at about 16 MGD, and they're supposed to be providing an alternative source when they reapply. So, you know, if that were to go down by half or something akin to that, I think you would see, that bump like you did on that international paper hydrograph. And that might be enough to get you some more water. But we're not really going to know that until probably the 2027, 2030 timeframe.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Cutlass, again, thanks for coming. I have a couple of questions for you.
So you got two more lights down there.
You have a question? I'll wait. Then Mr. Forehand.
Heard some time back about some experiments in pumping water into the ground.
Yes.
Yes.
Is that a thing?
It is a
Is it
thing.
working?
It is a thing. We have been working very closely with the Hampton Roads Sanitation District, who you may be aware is, I think, the largest wastewater treatment system in the state. And they have a very ambitious goal of being able to inject 100 million gallons a day of drinking water quality treated effluent into the aquifer. They have begun injecting at a demonstration project up to 100 or up to 1 MGD. They've injected about 600 million gallons total into the aquifer. Unfortunately, that's way to the east, and there are monitoring wells within 10 miles west of there, and we're not seeing anything. So my sense is that the modeling that was done to try to evaluate what the benefit is, while I still think there's going to be a regional benefit, I think it's going to take a lot longer than that preliminary modeling showed. It's always more difficult to inject water into the system than it is to pull it out. And so I think that's kind of what we're seeing in the field. The other dynamic that we have is that, as you guys are probably familiar, supply chain, the cost of materials and everything, is significantly delaying the ramp up schedule that they had planned. They had planned to be injecting 16 MGD by now, and they don't even have a final federal permit to allow them to start that yet. They have a draft that they're negotiating with, but the construction window is another 3 years or more under today's difficulties.
Okay. The compression of the aquifer after it's dried out, does that cause surface land to sink?
It does.
Okay. Where are we seeing that?
We are seeing that in and around West Point.
Okay.
We are seeing that in and around International Paper. And we are seeing some in Suffolk. And there's a new measurement device that's measuring in Chesapeake. and we're seeing some, but we don't know where we started.
Okay. Your reference is, you don't have the reference to know how far you've gone.
No, not in that case. I mean, in the other two cases, we've been able to monitor that land subsidence since the early 1980s.
Okay.
So we have a good idea of what the progression has been. In that other case, the equipment has only been in place for about 2 years.
So this isn't something you're seeing on the coast. This is something you're seeing inland. I mean, all those locations are 50, 60 miles inland from the coast. So
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Last question. James City County ran through and had a lot of wells drying up. Are you familiar with that about 20 years ago?
About 20 years ago.
18 to 20 years ago?
In James City County?
James City County. Yeah. Toano, which I believe is James City. Maybe it's
Yeah, no, that's James City. I can't say that I am. I mean, there were a number of problems with shallower wells that were using the Piney Point aquifer in 2002 as a result of the drought of record. So I'm not sure if it was a aquifer depletion issue or if it was a drought issue.
okay. They were shallow wells, is my recollection, but the county didn't fund them, the new wells, as I recall. But
well, and that may have been when they put in their most recent deep wells, and they would have had that mitigation responsibility.
Sure.
So if they had any problems, the county would have that.
I was just trying to see if that was an example of the mitigation that you spoke about.
It may be that they have done that in a number of those Hampton Roads localities where the localities have proactively gone and replaced some of these wells where they would have some periodic indication that water levels were moving a lot. So that may have been associated with that as well.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Sure.
Mr. Cutlass, again, first of all, you mentioned the critical cells in the county. I believe you identified 3 areas
In the Potomac Aquifer.
in the Potomac Aquifer that are part of the county, I believe.
Yes.
Can you put that slide back up, the one that had the 3 squares?
Sure.
Yes, I'm going to ask. Down 207.
Well, they're not numbered. I was gonna give them the number.
And I guess my question is, as Flo was saying, those are along 207, and certainly AP Hill sits at the in the middle part of that. Are there any similarities between those critical cells that are having issue within the county that you can identify or have tried to identify as to, because there's certainly not much growth there, and in those critical cells, it's not like it's our major growth area or there is a lot of development. So I'm trying to determine if you guys have looked at what are the similarities and the differences between that critical cell and where it lies on the aquifer.
Well, what it's most likely to be is some change in the elevation of the bedrock so that the aquifer is shallower in that area. That's the most likely cause and commonality. And so what that means is that portion of the aquifer that's included in that square is thinner and therefore is dewatering first. The other possibilities are that the sediments in those areas have a higher, what we call transmissivity. And what that means is that water can be removed from it at a faster rate than some of the other sediments that we know exist within that aquifer. So those would be the 2 most likely causes of any commonality in those 3.
Because you're talking about the water issue in Chesapeake and Virginia Beach, and And those are certainly high population areas, but they're not part of the critical cell the line that you've drawn down 95.
Yeah. Well,
So that seems to be contrary to what you're saying is the high population area of Virginia Beach and Norfolk on the one side, they have some issues, but
okay. I'm going to
But-
take you back here.
what?
So I'm going to take you back here. So while you're here, right?
Yes.
So when all of this growth here pulls the water down, it pulls, it
Affects us as well.
dewaters there first.
At a higher rate, because we're
Because it's at a higher elevation and it's thinner,
right.
okay? And remember, so you've got 100 feet here, you got 3,000 feet here.
Right.
So even though you have higher rates of withdrawal, your 80% is much
It's much less in
greater.
terms of water volume.
Yeah.
But they're gonna
So-
suck our water dry.
Right. So right. I was just going to say. So wouldn't it make sense then to look at not only limiting the amount of water that we can draw at our level, but since their end is larger, but they're drawing the majority, wouldn't it make sense to have a limit on the large and the small, rather than saying you're the smallest end and you're being drawn down? We're really being drawn down by two sources: our usage and usage in the larger areas.
Yeah. I mean, in effect, they kind of are, because their area of impact in many of those locations cover the entire coastal plain. So they have mitigation responsibilities to you. And so
And
if their area of impact hits one of those critical cell areas, they have to reduce their amount too.
but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Shouldn't there be? And you hit it around on the nail. Since
Yeah.
as a neighbor, if we had two wells and I had to mitigate,
Yeah.
why wouldn't they be responsible for helping to mitigate the water level in our area, since their usage is much greater?
Well, I mean, technically that responsibility exists, and there's an avenue in each one of their permits for someone to make a claim.
So we could make a claim against Chesapeake saying you're drawing too much water.
I mean, theoretically.
Yeah.
I mean, all of the largest users that your wells fall within their cone of depression, they have some responsibility.
That claim would go through you?
No, it actually goes through them. But
eventually through DEQ. I don't mean you personally. It goes, we would file a claim against Chesapeake in his example, and
no-
then Chesapeake would report back to DEQ?
well, the permit identifies a process for the claimant and the permittee to address any claim. And so it's between the claimant and the permittee to work it out. And there are certain demonstrations that have to be made consistent with that process, and that process becomes an enforceable part of that permit.
But the only agency that would be able to enforce this would be DEQ, since we're two government entities.
Sure. Right. I mean,
We would.
it's and the only reason I'm hedging is because it doesn't happen. So
It
we
can't
lack,
happen. I mean, I thought of it.
Well-
If I were a lawyer, certainly I would be thinking of it that way.
well, I appreciate that, but that said, it at that scale, it doesn't happen. That doesn't mean it couldn't, and it doesn't mean that somebody doesn't have an avenue to pursue that. So the way that I anticipate that it would go is that the permittee then has to notify us that they've
Yeah.
either resolved or not resolved a claim. And then it's going to be up to us to figure out what to do. And since we've never had to do that, I don't know what we would do.
Okay.
Okay.
Could I ask one more?
Yeah, Mr.
It's
Thomas,
along
yeah.
those same lines. You mentioned AP Hill, and I'm wondering, and I definitely understand chain of command. So, what, if any, authority do you have at or over Fort AP Hill?
Technically, they have sovereign immunity,
Yeah.
though. Yeah, the Army of all of the branches of the service have been the most cooperative. So we have been working with them toward a permit, and I think we're hopeful that with AP Hill we'll be able to secure a permit that they will, in fact, abide by and implement.
The first thing you said, without saying it, was they don't have to do anything you say.
That's correct.
Okay. That I understood, because I speak that language.
Yeah.
So the reality is they're actually going to try to go through the permitting process, and then they're going to abide by the permit that you issue, and you will enforce that permit.
That's correct.
Theoretically.
Theoretically.
Okay.
Mrs. Long?
Yes, thank you again for being here tonight. So we have 5 different areas in Virginia according to your little block map, and we're studying the coastal plain. Are you all starting to collect information from the other geographic areas also, so you have your baseline for the future? Because we're continue to grow and everybody
Yeah.
needs water.
Yeah, we're trying. The challenge that we face is that it's been difficult to get traction in the General Assembly that it's something we're spending money for. And we received approximately $7.8 million in Governor Northam's last budget to put in 20 wells to start collecting baseline data. So we're hopeful that may represent a proof of concept for further future consideration by the General Assembly. But certainly, given that land area, 20 wells is a drop in the bucket.
And my other question is, when did you all start the permitting fees on wells? Was that about 10 or 15 years ago?
On
like
in your location or in the
Right.
it started in 2014.
And how is the permitting fee established and what's it running now? And I ask this question because I was involved in a small town in the county about that time, and paying for 2 wells just about broke our bank, and it seems like it should be based on population or usage and not just a flat fee. And so I'm wondering, as we look at a bigger withdrawal permit and doing all these studies, what are we looking at financially, and what are our 2 small towns looking at?
Current is 9. Yeah, the current permit fee is $9,000.
Could have sworn we paid 10 a long time ago. Well, maybe that was
No?
for both wells. That might have been for both wells.
Yeah.
And the study fees, all these studies that we need to do before we apply, what do you think most people are spending on getting that work done?
I mean, it's really hard to say just because the contractors, all bid it differently and it changes.
Ballpark?
What do you know what the current?
We got 2 years to plan for it.
Yeah.
Is it equivalent to drilling a well? I mean, because Mr. Schiebel can tell you what he paid for his last well, just to because it's just actually boring the casing in, correct, is all that really happens with that.
Yeah, I mean, an aquifer test, did you get bids on that? Yeah.
40,000.
So does that, let me piggyback on that. So we do the aquifer test, let's say in Milford. Does that help the town of Bowling Green since it's in the same proximity? Or do they have to do the same thing all over again and pay all that to do it?
Typically, everybody has to do it, and what we found is that even on the same property and say 100 yards apart, the transmissivity can vary dramatically.
But the town could actually do their test well less than 100 yards from ours, theoretically.
Well, I mean, if it's that close, we certainly would have that conversation with you.
We could have a joint one.
That's what I'm saying is that rather than, because the town and the county limits, I mean, the town's providing water to county residents.
Yeah.
In a lot of cases, so you could actually theoretically drill this well somewhere and do all that work and go, here it is for
This purpose.
Because I read on your slide that the cone of depression is 8.5, almost 9 miles, 8.9 miles from, is that the county well in Milford? Or, I mean.
No, that was the Bowling Green.
So that's the Bowling Green well. So that's almost to the high school for us. I mean, 8 miles from Bowling Green, you're at the high school. So in theory, when you look at the impact, it's all those groundwater wells are in that same sphere or that same impact area. So is there a way to make that process sort of, we do it and it goes for the town and the county because of the sphere of influence that it's actually in? Is that something that's doable?
I can't.
I'm not looking for it, but I think that's something we need to think about because of the sphere. What you're showing us is that all of our wells are in the same geographic sphere of impact. And when one well's on or all wells are on, we're all impacting each other in some form or fashion.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't. If we were to do a joint project, the town and the county together on one site, that would be okay with you, wouldn't it?
Well, I'll have to get my geologists in the room and we'll have to talk about what they know and what they don't know and what you're proposing.
But it's one well.
Certainly,
it's one well period, and you'd approve one well if all the things worked out, right?
I'm certainly willing to have that conversation with you, and we'll figure out what the right path is.
That's a pretty good Fred Astaire. But the reality is, if we do one well, you're going to approve our one well. You don't really care who our partners are behind the scene, right?
He cares about everything that affects water. That's his job.
But we're doing the well, right? We do one well. You say yeah, yes, no. You need to do this. We say okay, thank you. We have friends that want to work with us. You don't care.
We like friends who work together.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, I think we've got some time. It's worth that conversation. And if that entails Mr. Schiebel having the geologist come up and meeting with the town manager and us being able to negotiate a site that's agreeable to all the parties, that it would make more, since we're all impacting that graph just says it all.
Yes.
Mrs. Long?
Yes.
I almost can hear you. For the renewal for the the well that we've got to do to look at
26.
Yeah, the 2026 well that they've got to do. I mean, their permits probably due the same time ours is. Yeah.
The aquifer test makes sense. The geophysical borehole doesn't. And the reason I say that is that the purpose of the geophysics is to identify what each individual well, which aquifer each individual well is screened in.
Okay.
So that wouldn't be comparable. But certainly I think there's a reasonable conversation that could be had for an aquifer test.
Okay.
And I have one other question, please. Yeah. Since we're studying groundwater withdrawal from the Rappahannock, as you suggested would be one of our courses, how is the amount of withdrawal that will be allowed calculated? Is it based on square acreage of our county? Is it based on some magical projection in growth? Because I'm thinking we've got a lot of big counties up above us, Stafford, Northern Virginia, Spotsylvania, which is growing like crazy. And that water's flowing down toward us. You know, who gets the straw in first, and are we protected after we invest in putting in a withdrawal permit?
Well, the first answer is the way Virginia has structured its program, it's first come, first served. Okay. The two things in both groundwater and surface water that you have to demonstrate in order to get your allocation, and it drives how much you get, is you have to be able to demonstrate and argue what your need is and show what you're going to use over the term of the permit or what you're likely to use. And then you have to, through the technical evaluation, there's modeling both for surface water and groundwater to determine what the impact on the aquifer or the river is. And there are different criteria for surface water than groundwater, but it's conceptually the same. There's a limit that you're supposed to maintain. If you don't go below that limit, then any withdrawal that you can justify, you can receive.
Is the permit on groundwater withdrawal the same length of time as
Yes.
a well?
They're both 15 years.
All right. And can we increase as we grow our request?
You can. There are different processes depending on where in the term of the permit you want to expand. If you expand during a permit term, there's a modification process. And then if you wait until renewal, then you would just ask for the amount that you needed for that next 15 years.
And if we're looking at these prices for re-permitting wells, what are we looking at for re-permitting withdrawal systems?
Well, those permits are a lot more expensive. Yeah, a lot more water, true. There's like 8 different categories, and it's based on whether there's a reservoir associated with it or and how much you're going to withdraw. So the cheapest one is 15,000, and then it goes up to 35,000. My guess would be you'd be in the 15 to 25,000 range somewhere.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions from board members? Ms. Thomas? Are you good? Well, we certainly appreciate you coming, certainly appreciate the information, and I'm sure we'll have more questions as we move closer to 2026, that's for sure.
Well, and feel free to ask, and I hope I didn't take too much of the board's time.
Not at all. Very informational. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Anybody need a break? We're good. All right. Next on the agenda is a presentation of Planning and Finance by Davenport and Company.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman, members. How are you?
Good evening.
I've got books if anybody needs them, but I understand that you guys may have them. Okay. Perfect.
I don't have it. I don't have it. We do need them.
You do need them?
Yeah.
Sorry, she said it's zeros online.
I didn't get it electronically. Oh. I apologize.
All right. Nice to always have nice, hard colored pictures, right?
So you didn't have your assistant come this evening?
I did not. And for those of you who've known Alex Hawk, that's the dark-haired, so Alex left this summer and went back to grad school at UVA, which is where he went to undergrad there. So we were happy for him, but sad to lose him because he was a very smart young man. And y'all have met Stephen Geist, who's Clay's nephew. So Stephen has moved up into Alex's spot and supporting me. So yeah, but you know, he wasn't able to make it tonight. And then we have a young man who he's training. So, you know, keep changing. So I guess this evening, what we want to talk about are, we've got two different borrowings, one for the general fund, one for the water utility system, water and sewer system. So we're going to go through that. We've got roughly about 12 million of needs, 9.5 million on the general government school side, and then 2.6 million on the utility side. Page 2 has a listing of the projects for the general government and school. Like we've typically done, you've got them broken out between the different amortization terms. Obviously, we're trying to pay back the projects over their useful life or thereabouts. So we've got 5-year projects, 10-year projects, 15-year projects, and then 20-year projects for those that are going to last a much longer time period. Page 3, we've got the utility projects, which are basically 10 and 20 years, about 2.6 million. Just to kind of let you know where we are interest rate wise, we obviously left the historic lows that took place over the last several years. We're kind of back into a period where interest rates were in the, I'll say 2012 to 2018, 19 timeframe, which you might remember back then, we thought those rates were awesome. We were under 4%. It was like, hey, that's great. Well, that's kind of where we are now. We're creeping back up to around 4%. We used 4% as our estimates for the 20-year projects, and we added 50 basis points just to give a little bit of a cushion. While the Fed is still raising rates on the short-term side of things, and we expect that to go up again at the end of the month, what we're seeing is that usually affects our tax exempt rates in the first 5 or 6 years, and then after that, it's more market based, and so it's not even tied, believe it or not, directly to the 10-year Treasury. The 10-year Treasury will jump up 15 basis points, and our rates won't change. But then 2 weeks later, our rates will go up 5 basis points 3 days in a row, and sort of catch up. So it's they're not really tied one for one. Some of it's supply and demand. There's not a lot of bonds out there in the marketplace right now. As you can imagine, a lot of local governments have the COVID money that they're still trying to figure out how to spend. So we're not seeing a lot of bonds out there from a new project standpoint, and there's not a lot of refinancings going on. So there's that. The lack of supply is helping keep prices up and yields down. So we did our typical analysis and said, okay, do we look at this as a public sale and try to go out and get bond ratings, do a preliminary official statement and sell it to investors from the standpoint of a public sale? Or do we do a request for proposals and sending out to the bank lending institutions? And so when we looked at it, the cost, because we're talking about 12 million, because of the cost and the fact that they're only going out 20 years for these projects, as we looked at the analysis, it made more sense to go the direct bank loan solicitation route. So that's what we're basing our analysis on. Is basically what we would do is put together a request for proposals, bring it back to you in your October meeting for approval, and give you the results. Wanted to quickly just one of the things we always like to look at is kind of what's been going on with fund balance. Obviously, over the tenure that I've been working with you all, we've gone from having to do borrowings to make ends meet from a standpoint of cash flow to we've now got some very strong fund balances and have been able to get our bond rating up. So 2021 up at 25, north of 25% as far as the fund balance levels. Obviously, we're still waiting on 22 results. It's working through the closing of the year at this point. And I understand that we, at least for your fiscal 23 budget, that you've used some of the fund balance. So some of that will come down. I think the one word of caution is I understand some of that is for ongoing expenditures. So when you get to 24, you're going to have to figure out how to pay for those, assuming those expenditures come to fruition, if you're able to actually put people into those positions, which of course is difficult sometimes these days, finding the actual workers to fill those positions. But that's one thing to keep in mind. And also keep in mind that when we did the borrowing last time, we basically bought ourselves a little bit of time, knowing that we were going to need some dollars down the road. I believe the number was roughly about $500,000 between the general government schools and the utility side that was going to be needed to take on the debt service in the future. So keep in mind that the numbers you're going to see in a little bit also include the existing debt, but to take on this additional debt, we're going to have to come up with more dollars in a future budget. So when you look at the existing debt service now, you'll see we are roughly about 8.8 million a year of debt service for general government and schools. So it's fairly flat over the next several years, again, because we let it ramp up to 2023. The debt service that we're estimating for the roughly 9.5 million of projects for the schools and new money is about $800,000 in the first several years. And that, of course, is because we've got some of those 5-year projects up front. Then it starts dropping down as those smaller projects or quicker amortizing projects roll off. When we put the two together, and this is basically taking the existing debt service and this new debt service for these potential FY23 projects, when we look at how much we have in the debt service budget for 23, we're still going to need another 100,000 for this year and then 700,000 for 2024 in order to take care of the debt service. So that's another $800,000 we're going to need over the course of the next 2 years. Graphically, this is what it looks like. So we basically start paying the debt service, most of it back in 2024, and then 25 and 26 before the debt service drops back below where your budget is now. Utility system, very similar story. Of course, the utility system, we have it structured where it's a gently sloping downward, but you'll notice that we do have a jump going from 23 to 24. That's the 500,000 that I was speaking about. For these, the $2.5+ million of new projects that's going to cost about $230,000 in the first 10 years, and then it drops down after the 10-year projects fall off. When we add it to the existing debt service, essentially we're going to need about $28,000 in this year, and then $700,000, which is most of that is from the previous year's debt. Only $200,000 of that is for this particular issue. And then graphically, that's what it looks like. The blue line being how much is in the budget for 23. As far as what it looks like on our debt ratios, and again, we're still counting the utility debt in these ratios because they're not self-supporting. So we're right up against our 3% limit, but then with the expected growth of roughly 2%, we've been just estimating 2% a year on assessed values, and the paying off of the debt, which is you have a nice rapid payoff. It declines pretty. It gives us enough room to take on some additional debt in the coming years. It's really the debt service to revenues, which is basically how much debt service versus our budget. That's going to jump up in 2024 about a little over 13% and approaching our 15% limit. When we look at what is remaining in terms of capacity, we use that particular graphic. We ran these at 4% with a revenue growth of 2% annually, and we also ran it at 5% in case interest rates do continue to go up. So what this shows you is if you were to take these borrowings on, and assuming we're borrowing at 20 years and 4% down the road, your capacity for the remaining of this year is about $3 million. If you don't use it, it rolls into the next year. So next year we've got 10.5. If you don't use the 3, it would be 13.5, and so on. So if you look at that 5-year window, it's about $47.5 million. But a lot of that is in that 5th year. You'll see, and that's that drop off. Remember, the debt service is very flat for 4 years, and then it drops off. That drop off produces about $18 million of capacity at 4%. If you look at 5%, it's only 43.5 million. So it's less.
Courtney, one second.
Yes, sir.
What you're saying is basically we would need to be very judicious about whatever debt we take on to in the next 4 years. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. As interest rates go up, it's going to eat a little bit into our capacity because interest costs are going up. But also, we've taken on a lot of debt over the last several years between the school projects and some of these other projects.
Okay, which would kind of mean we wouldn't want to go into more debt.
Yeah, and
for
we
the next
did
5
that,
years.
some of that because interest rates were so low, we figured we'll borrow it now. You know, some of the projects we did, we just moved forward because we could borrow the money for, 1%. So, and we talked about this. We said if we did that, then interest rates went up, our ability to borrow in the next couple of years would come way down. So that doesn't surprise me at all.
It's getting squeezed. It definitely is. And that's really my presentation. So, but what I was going to say is, and that's exactly right. It's starting to squeeze a little bit. I was talking to Charlie about, how much you got in your budget for PAYGO. And that's been building up over the years. A little bit of a pause because of COVID. That's something I think we want to take a look at as you move forward, is starting to put more dollars aside in the annual budget. From what I'm hearing, it sounds like we've had some economic development, nice things have been going on here that hopefully will lead to more revenues down the road. Maybe we can take some of those revenues and start putting it toward paying for the cars outright, let's say sheriff's cars, versus having to borrow for them. Things like that would be one way to start chipping away at the debt capacity and freeing it up and not putting more on it.
Yeah, that way the cars, as they drop off, that would really be real revenue coming back.
Right.
Right. So it's real revenue coming back as we pay cash for each one of those years going forward.
Exactly.
Yeah, but real revenue on a car like that
Kinda
is
like the school
$2,000.
buses.
Oh, yeah, but what I'm saying is the 5-year we're financing them for 4 or 5 years. So if we pay cash for them up front, which we've done with school buses, we've
Like
all
school
worked hard to
buses.
start buying school buses cash at $100,000 a piece, 5 of them at a time. When we finally paid off the last school bus lease, it was real money that we weren't sending back out.
Yeah. So
Courtney,
it's
do you-
basically you're using operating money to pay for those operating capital items.
Do you recall or have offhand how much debt we took on in the last 5 or 6 years?
I was going to say, I know the last issue was around 20, and then there were some before that. So I'm going to say probably around 30 million just in the last several years.
In the last several?
Yeah.
Some of that was refinance, right?
Yeah.
The refinancings were all saved.
We
so I
did
wouldn't
do
count that.
do some refinancing on the.
I mean, a lot of stuff was bound up together and it was.
No,
New money.
what my question is, how much new debt
New
we've taken
debt,
on?
yeah, away from the refinancing.
Most of the refinancings were actually money saving
Right.
over the old
And
interest rate.
I don't recall $30 million in the last 5 years.
I thought the last issue we did was about 20, because remember we did it, and she's looking down,
The water.
Oh, the water
but
system was like
we did a
15.
public
15
sale.
million.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
So 21 and 15, it's about 35 million, and no refinancing in that.
I thought it was closer to 40. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess so.
So it's probably about 36 million, give or take. I'm rounding, but that's why I remember the 20. I forgot the 15, but
Yeah. I
They
mean,
were
I just
big.
thought it was 40. It was
yeah,
just to get
they
an
were big
idea.
enough that we actually went through the whole public sale, because
Yeah.
there's not an exact number, but when you start getting north of 20 million, the banks, there's fewer and fewer banks that can play in that space. And so that's why we went public on those. While this being a little bit smaller, we're thinking banks. That's why I knew it was above 20. That's how big. 39 million in the last 5 years.
Okay, there's another
That was
million
the-
because 40 sticks in my head. So
Yeah,
somewhere there's another million.
there you go.
All right.
How much are we pushing our bond rating grade? And would it help if we trimmed some things off and gave that couple of years. I mean, we're
Yeah.
right up there at our line right now. If we trimmed it back a little bit somehow, would that help?
So we're not in danger on the bond rating side because we're not above our policies and we're not going above our policies. What makes it, to be honest, what makes it difficult, if we had to go and speak to them for this particular issuance, the thing that makes me the most nervous having to explain to them is the use of fund balance for ongoing revenue, ongoing expenditures. That's always a tricky one. That's something they really do not like because it's an unbalanced budget in their minds. Not saying that it's not a bad thing to use fund balance at the right time or for certain things, but that's one of the things they don't like. Your debt levels are still below the guidelines. The guidelines we set are good guidelines for a good AA rating entity, which we are. So as long as we're not above those guidelines.
But stop right there for a second, Courtney, because our unfunded balance being used for the budget is what? 2%, 3%? We're using how much money? 700,000? 1.7 of $100 million budget.
Yeah, it's
1.7.
It's not the percentage. It's just the fact that you're using. It's in their minds. They're like, well, what are you going to do a couple of years from now if those revenues don't show up from somewhere else? So you got through 23. What are you doing in 24? And I'm suspecting the way you guys are thinking is you've got these new projects that are going to come in and have some revenues.
No,
right?
Not
new projects.
That's stuff they shouldn't have told you about. Because really, I mean, you're based on where we are.
And that's the rating agency's concern is what happens if they don't happen.
And then I have this thing that I think is going to happen.
Yeah.
But I save it in my back pocket just in case it doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So
if it doesn't happen and you've got all those new positions filled, where do those dollars come from? That's the way they think. That's their mindset.
Okay. Now, in that sense, if it doesn't happen, do I need all those new things?
And that's part of what
that's part of the discussion when you have with them.
Then you have to go and start cutting the budget and those positions go back away. So that's a possibility. I'm just telling you, I'm just passing along.
They're not going to go, they're not going to go away, Charlie. You can turn back around.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that they're going to immediately downgrade you.
Yeah.
But then it just, now they start digging deeper into, okay, what else is out
But I wanted to know that process because if it, we're spending a little, because that's the way the budget process works.
Right.
We never know exactly how much it is, so we always plan to spend some of the fund balance.
Yep.
Now, for the most part, we returned more than what we planned to spend because revenues were up.
Yep. And I'm not saying you're alone. There are other people that do that, but typically the way we spend it is, they spend it on sheriff's vehicles and one-time uses. But in this case, my understanding is it's more for true ongoing expenses.
Well,
I'm just telling you how we look at it when we get
differently.
But in this case, it really is. I got this thing that's going to come in, so I do have this revenue.
Right, and that's the way we probably would spend it if I had to do it. I'm just, me, I'm upfront with you guys.
Well, and that's kind of why I wanted to understand exactly what you were saying when they were concerned, so we could address whatever objections they have if we had to come to that point.
And just so we're not having those discussions.
Right.
Unless we were actually going to do this bond issue that way, but we're not. So but I wanted to let you know.
But I used to be a Boy Scout, so I want to be prepared.
I know, and that's why I'm telling you.
Okay.
Because I know you guys like to hear why, not just hearing me tell you what you should do.
I was only a Boy Scout for a little while, but it stuck.
The same with me. I didn't go all the way.
Okay.
Some days I wish I did, but I didn't make it out.
Okay.
Okay.
Ms. Long?
Yes. I mean, I think we've done well, but I want to point out there are a couple of things we've got to think about. We've got a pay study coming in. We don't know how much that's going to hit us next year. I remember that, or whenever they finished doing it, and we decided what raises we're going to get. We also realized that I believe someone told me we should raise taxes more than we did, and we didn't. So I don't think there's a a super influx there. And I get real nervous when we start talking about, oh, we've got this money coming. I've been married to a realtor for too long to realize you don't count your money until you got the check in your hand. And these companies are going to need time to get their feet on the ground, get their staff in, start producing, start making money, and we got to wait for tax seasons to come around. You were already taking 1.7 or so out of the fund balance every day. I just think we should go through, and if we can chip off a couple million, it might make the difference as to how long we can go without raising taxes again. And we can always come back and borrow more if we need to, but we would at least look like we were trying to not pay ahead of time. I just would like to keep thinking the one project that we were supposed to have when I first came on the board that still isn't there. And now if they come, they're going to be a quarter of the size they promised us. So that's just my concern. And I think we could think about trying to move back on a couple of things.
We can always take a look at and see what we're talking about in terms of the projects. I mean, they have them listed.
Well, I have two suggestions, and then I also looked, and that was because of a comment you made, Mr. At the staff meeting on park improvements. You said,
yes.
Did we ever do that as a referendum? So that's 50,000, and I'm on general government and school projects, but I'm looking at the Sparta Fire Station, and goodness knows we need one in the future. But right now, the one we have, as long as we don't get another flood, and we can always get it back in condition again, I'm wondering if we couldn't take the money out to do all the permitting, because we've got to do all the stormwater permitting, the wells, the drain field, the landscaping. Start that, which will take at least a year, 2 years, I would think, to get the permits. Mike, what do you think? What are we talking on getting all the permits we need for Sparta Fire Station? For a year. So that would give the businesses another year to get in, and then we can come back and get the rest. And also the ladder truck, we can put the deposit on now. That's not going to be ready, which would probably be about, what, 50%, Chief?
2 years.
You have to have 50% to anchor it, and it's going to take it 2 years to get built. That'd take us $1 million off of what we're going to borrow. It's not quite enough, but those were two things I saw. And anybody else got any ideas? I don't want to raise taxes again this year, and I don't want us to lose our bond rating. And it seems silly to borrow money and pay interest on money if we can wait a year or 2 years and then borrow it. So that's just my thoughts.
What are the, Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Black.
What are the park improvements? What were the 50,000 again? I can't.
Park equipment, playground.
We're down near where the trail is, that area? Yeah. Okay.
Is it? I think, I think, Mr. Long, you bring up a good point about trying to defer some of this cost. I know that Mr. Seal is in total disagreement, but I kind of agree that we could hold off on the Sparta Fire Department, is my thought.
No, I'm not saying all of it. We still have to borrow to do all the studies.
Right.
But that's going to take some time. We also don't have people we got to figure out how we're going to pay the staff. We've got Upper Caroline, they're willing to pay to have some people put in there. We don't have enough staff yet to do that. And God bless them, at least Sparta still has, about 12 reliable volunteers down there that put in several hours a week, but it's just going to take time, and I'd rather not see the money being paid interest on if we could wait and when we get ready to break ground, borrow it.
Mr. Rogers, where do you think interest rates are going to be a year from now?
3% higher.
That's a great question. Let me turn to my.
3% higher.
I mean, double where we're at today?
No, I don't think so. And this is me just trying to take in the years I've done this and kind of what's out there. I mean, they're going to raise rates again at the end of this month. That's going to start slowing folks from buying houses. The car market's got to slow down at some point. People aren't going to be able to afford these payments. So I think parts of our economy are going to start slowing. I wouldn't be surprised if we went, I'm not so sure we didn't go through a little mini recession. I'm not sure we may not still be in a recession. We may go through a recession next year when housing prices are liable to come back down. So I just don't think rates are going to go much higher. And when I say rates, I'm talking about the long term. I'm talking about like 10 and 20 year rates. They may go up a little bit. I mean, let's go back to the chart. That one. So ignore the right side. That's the dip that we are in. But on the left side there, if you look back from about 2012 to 2019, we kind of bounced around there in a couple of little peaks and valleys. I wouldn't be surprised if we kind of did that again in that 3 to 4% range. And we're kind of right, that 20-year, we're right now right at that 3.25% range in terms of a 20-year tax exempt rate. So I could kind of see us bouncing around plus or minus 50 basis points. But I don't think we're talking about 6% interest rates or 5% from a standpoint of reality.
I mean, we're building 2 fire stations. We're spending twice as much on a fire station on the west side of the county. And it's going to take twice as much work, and the permits are twice the size.
Right, and that's one we're going to have to staff totally.
Right, and so, I've been on this trail since 2008, and that fire station has flooded 2 times since 2008. The floor is undermined. Those were used cinder blocks when it was built. I'm out of time on a fire station because if something happens to it, there's nowhere to go.
But can we do we have the money to staff? That's it. I have one up in Upper Caroline with good volunteers too, but fewer, who have taken their own funds out to give their people coverage. Now I'm going to say, okay, we're going to borrow $2 million to build a new building down here with good volunteers also that put in an average of 1.5 days a year. We got to be able to afford to supplement our volunteers, or that's just $2 million sitting out in the field doing nothing except for the day and a half they each give, which I appreciate. But everybody deserves coverage, and it can't all go to buildings, and it can't all go to fuzz. It has to go to staff to protect our citizens. And I want to make sure we have enough money to cover the increases in salary so we can hire people to protect our citizens. And if it means, we have to put off for a couple of years, or we work a little bit at a time to move, at least they have a station now that they can use. I've got a station in Port Royal. I can't fit a bigger engine in.
I got a station that's not even really habitable. I mean, that station's been gutted to just about nothing. You can't have people stay there.
I've got a station that's non-existent, so let's not compare the two.
Well, no, but the difference is that the Carmel Church station needs 19 people for it to be sustained.
And if you'd have worked with me, we would have had more, but we've got a development right there around the corner that's going to give us enough to pay for those people.
A development?
Yeah.
What do you mean a development?
The Flint project.
Oh. It's already being built.
That's what I'm saying.
But I mean,
that's the project that's paying for those people.
Well,
but those people have to move around and protect everybody too. But that means we need more, which means we need more funding into salaries. And I thought that I was told that the Sparta building was usable, and if there was another flood, it could be made usable again in a couple of weeks until we got to the part of building a new station after we get all the permits and stuff. Maybe it's not worth putting it off for 2 years or 18 months, but I'm just putting it out there. We need to have a lot of things and not raise taxes.
Can I,
Mr.
Chair?
Mr. Black,
Chief Loftus?
I'll disagree and say that.
Chief? So I have a couple of questions regarding these two fire stations. Obviously, the Carmel Church, it's going to be county owned, right? It's going to have 19 firefighters. That's the plan, right? Is when that thing opens up and whenever it opens up.
18 firefighters.
18 firefighters and yeah, okay. So with the, and that's going to be full, that's all full-time staff?
Correct.
There's no volunteers going there?
There probably will be some volunteers there. The county
Okay.
volunteer program will probably run out of there as well.
Okay. Now what about like with Sparta? Because I know this is like, right now their building is owned, I mean, they own their own building, correct?
Correct.
Okay. What are their like, I mean, just out of curiosity, what is the call volume that they're getting and what % of the calls are they answering?
Yeah, I looked at it.
I've got that, Jeff. They put in, hold on. They had 107 calls, non-responses 72. This was last year, I think, data. And the 12 members, they average, put them all together, 37 and a quarter hours service.
For what period?
From January to September of this year.
37.5 from January to September.
Mm-hmm.
Total?
Per person, 447 hours for the whole group.
Total?
So one
that's
thing to
three.
keep in mind with Sparta, though, Sparta is very unique. It is the only station in the county that does not have its own EMS district. So when you're looking at these calls, comparing them to a different station in the county, they are strictly fire calls only. Okay. So Bowling Green has that district for EMS. If you look at Upper Caroline's calls or Port Royal's calls, they're going to be higher just because of the fact that they have an EMS district for them. Whether they're responding there or not is irrelevant. So these calls are going to be lower.
What about man hours for volunteers in terms of an average? It looks like right now
What are they getting?
it's 5 hours per person from January through September. If she says 37.5.
So they're out of their 12 members, they're averaging 37.5 hours per member at this point. Our standard in the county is 75 hours a year to stay a member. You got to put 75 hours in a year.
Will Sparta, if we build the new station, will they get a rescue squad? Will it become a full station where it's not just fire calls? Will we have medical also?
Regardless if we build the station, the station is built, it'll be housed just the way it is today with equipment. If the county chooses to put staffing in there, that staff will be dual trained and they will run an ambulance out of there. The station is designed to expand in the future to allow for that. But right now, no, they would not expand their service to EMS. They don't have the personnel.
Chief?
Mr. Black.
You know, what Mr. Seeley has talked about in the past has been the flooding, and obviously that is right near a river. What has been done, or like, so we got a heavy rain again, very heavy rain, tropical storm or something. What has been done to mitigate any situation there? I mean, that would, in case like we have another situation like that, are we going to be flooded out again and then back to the drawing board, or?
I mean, if we have another freshwater event, another flooding event, they're going to flood. Then they have the potential to flood. What we did in the last go round, the last set of construction, is went in there and kind of predicted that it would flood again. And so we made some of the walls to be removable so we can remove the insulation, put the walls back up. Everything from the grade level up 36 inches is metal, diamond plate, and that diamond plate can be taken off, sanitized, and put back on.
Just out of curiosity, when it's flooded in the past, I don't know maybe if you've been here or not, like how bad is it? I mean, how high has it gone? And
It's gotten to 36 inches inside the bay.
It's gotten higher than 36 the first time it was.
Yeah.
That's why I asked the board last year to take a visit to the Sparta firehouse. I think it's important that you see where the water level has been, what they've done in terms of the plating, so you get an idea of the usability of the firehouse. I personally thought that it looked a whole lot better than Port Royal, to be honest with you. When I went, and I really couldn't understand, not to say anything against the Port Royal volunteer, but the firehouse looked pretty good in Sparta, to be honest with you. Now,
Now, I will say there's no sleeping quarters in Sparta. There is in Port Royal. There's nothing. I mean, that station is very bare bones, nothing left. Even the lounge area is not all that. And Mr. Whiteman can talk a little bit about the structural situation. I mean, that floor has been undermined with water. The cinder blocks have been saturated. Kevin, is there anything else that goes along with that?
Yeah, I've been, like I said, Mr. Sealy, I've been into Sparta, and I didn't feel it, and that's just me personally again, had deteriorated as much as I thought from the conversation. I think Mr. Whiteman.
Yes, we did have some structural failure on the east side of the building. It was not only from flooding, but it was from the downspouts. Chief Loftus and I got bids. We went in, underpinned the east side, and we took the downspouts down, buried them, and took them down to the creek that runs alongside. Now, they're at the creek. We get a significant rain event, and it comes up. But like Chief Loftus has said, during the last event we got in there, it cost us 28 grand, 40 grand to get it back in shape. But it won't be 40 grand next time because we have fixed what was there, and it'll just be the removal, the cleansing, and then the putting back together. So, yeah, everything's above flood stage.
Except the building.
Except for the building.
Everything's not above flood stage. I mean, let's be real.
Anything will be lost. HVAC, propane tanks. We took everything above flood stage. It'll go through, all the electricals bought up, the whole 9 yards. The water will go through, the water will recede, we'll clean up.
So the biggest, Mr. Sealy, so you're saying the ability to house a firefighter.
I mean, you're not, you can't.
Sealy, wait, let me ask my question. Let me ask my question for you. So you're saying that the ability to do that is not there at Sparta, correct?
Correct.
And what other issue do you feel?
I mean, without the ability to have volunteers, because it's a policy, they've got to be at the station. They can't respond from home. So if you can't stay there, if the conditions there are so that you can't stay there, and if you went and looked at it, it's a room, it's about the corner, it's not very big. The corner of the stage is their lounge and sleeping area. So if you can't live there, you can't respond unless you go to the station, get your gear, and catch your truck. You're not going. The volunteerism is dropped off, A, because of the look of the station, and B, because there's no place to stay. So you can't recruit people to come stay and volunteer when there's nothing there to stay at.
So that to me would mean what we need to figure out is how much doing it a year at a time, with doing all the permitting first and then borrowing the rest when we're ready to break ground, if that would make a difference. And I don't do the math, and I do not do his job or Mr. Cully's job or Tamika's job, so they'll have to tell me that.
So I'll just say at 4%, $1 million is roughly about $80,000 of debt service. So you'd be saving however many, if you're talking about $2 million, you're talking about $160,000 per year of however many years it is until you borrow that again. You know, you're thinking of borrowing the $2 million.
maybe there's some other stuff on here that can wait too. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, we talked at our last meeting, we did lights at one of the school things, and we did some other things. We spent like $400,000. Maybe I don't have to upgrade the school grounds maintenance equipment.
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
Well, it's on here, but maybe I don't have to have, 2 support vehicles. We're gonna take the ladder truck if we can, whatever payment of that, we're sacrificing that. Yeah. We do 50 now and Jeff can wait a year. I waited 20.
Now, I've waited, the whole Sparta community has waited. We spent that money on a library in Dawn.
No, you turned
In
the money,
2008.
back in.
That money was spent.
That money
That
sat,
money was spent.
the money sat for a year and then we didn't spend it and we turned that money back in.
Didn't sit for a year and we didn't have
Yes,
the
it did.
opportunity.
Yes,
to
it did.
All right, gentlemen. All right. I'm not sure who was right about that. I think I heard at the time.
Fine.
I was there.
I was there also.
And I have witnesses that can confirm.
I'll go to
that.
the minutes of the meeting.
I'll go to real people.
And I'll go to the minutes of what happened.
I'll go to real people.
All right, gentlemen, the real question is it an expense that are we willing to make some changes here
I
to
am
hold
now.
on to this money?
I would like to comment.
Yes, sir.
I look at the list and the aerial truck's going to take 2 years to be delivered. We're going to have warehouses in that facility. We have them right now. We have no ability to get on the roof quickly or easily on anything if it's beyond a ground ladder. We need a fire engine for the station in Caramel Church. We need Caramel Church Station. I'm not going to dispute that. That's going to relieve pressure on all of the other fire stations in the county. I like the list as it is. I'm not terribly concerned with finding $160,000. We have things under construction that if they were to stop right now, the real estate taxes would cover that. We have other stuff that's coming. We have hundreds of houses that have been occupied in the last 6 months, and all that personal property tax is going to go right into this. We have $4, $5, $6 million we've taken out of the budget to pay for the Ladysmith Road improvements. That we're done with that. So that money that we've paid out is now not getting paid out because we're done.
You borrowed $2 million.
Yeah, but what I'm saying, it's that we're doing stuff that we need. This is big stuff, and I don't like the number, but at the end of the day, this is piled up because we didn't spend money 15 years ago. We went 8 years without buying a fire truck. We've been doing great the last years, buying one, sometimes 2 a year. We haven't had an aerial truck in 10 years now.
Does it matter if we pay for the aerial truck, the deposit, and then pay the rest of it when it's
As
due
long
in
as we
2
get
years?
it, as long as we order
goes
it
in.
in 2 years, we
That
get
was
it,
cheap.
and there's no
What
delay
Chief
from that. I got no problem. I mean, but like I said, nothing's going to be fast.
That's really what she's saying. And
Yeah, but is that just the process of getting another loan costs money? This is all bundled together right now with one fee. So we go through this process again to finance $1.5 million. We're still going to have to pay that fee. This isn't free. This is $60,000-$70,000 to go through this process, if I remember correctly. So I just.
All right, I just think
that's
we
just my
need to
opinion.
make
I'm
sure
just
we're
1 to
not
6.
spending more than we need to.
Yeah, understood.
I still don't think we need all this stuff. I mean, the school transport vehicles, do we have to go this time? We're talking about raises for deputies. Do we have to get this many cars? What is this, 10 cars?
Yeah, they're worn out.
Hmm?
They're worn out. They start putting transmission and engines in them with what costs are today. That I keep a list of those with the mileage.
He just got one with 100,000 miles on it.
How many? 130. What year was it? Yeah.
That's worn out?
Yeah, and he got one right before that, and that thing was cutting off on him in the road and had all kinds of weird problems. That's why he got another one. I would add, we on the ladder truck tower, we'll have another borrowing next year. We wouldn't just borrow to borrow the other half of that. I'm sure we're going to need to borrow for patrol cars and an ambulance.
Sure.
As much as I would like to be able to come to you next year and say, hey, we're funding this like school buses, I've got to find 1.5 million right now with this borrowing and last year's borrowing in new debt service in 24's budget. So I'm not going to have a lot of room to go, all right, I got 300 or 200 to throw to an ambulance, well, 250, because ambulances are going sky high because of everything that's going on. So I'm sure we'll have another 4 or 5 year, we'll be going, Courtney, to get us some lease type money. Hopefully won't be borrowing for any big building projects, but our normal borrowing we would still be doing where we could add the other half of the truck in. So I don't.
I got no problem as long as it doesn't delay throw it out another 12 months before we actually get it.
It takes it's more than 2 years.
Right.
27 months to get anything. I mean, we're waiting on trucks we borrowed money for 2 years ago now that aren't in the county yet, engine 2 and engine 1.
No argument for me with that.
Mr. Cullen?
Wait, Mr. Black.
I guess, a lot of times we, I mean, you are kind of the financial expert of the county. And so I guess my question to you is your recommendation. Does it make sense for us to do the Sparta Fire Station at a later time and borrow it now? Or is it,
That becomes a political will. What these numbers show you is we're sort of bumping up against our borrowing limit. So it's taken us a while. Of course, we've got the land and we're in design. So we have a contract for the design right now. So then once we have some of that information, we'll be able to go to DEQ to start getting our stormwater permit. But probably the earliest we could even go to construction would be next year. So we're about 12 months away. So we might could borrow the other half of that next year, which would then roll some of that debt service out of 24 into 25, which would help me not need a 1.5 million. So if we could save that, then we would borrow it later. We could then take some of the money we've already got for Sparta and put in Carmel Church, not have to borrow. So you potentially could save about $3 million in this borrow and get it down from 12 to 9.
But you see, you're going to take you're going to take the money that's for Sparta Fire Station on. You wouldn't borrow half. You'd have to borrow all the Sparta Fire Station next year.
Right.
And then we get jammed up, and then there's no fire station again, which is where I was before.
I'm not advocating that, but I'm just saying.
But that's my point is, I get here all the folks in Sparta get here. We've gone through this long process. We could be building in next spring, next summer.
No, I think next September.
I don't know why. I mean, it's 90 days, 120 days for DEQ. We've had the land. We've done all the surveys. We've done everything. The time. How can we start Carmel Church with twice as much work and not start Sparta in half the time?
Because we were at this point last year for Carmel Church.
No, you still don't have a DEQ.
Mr. Sealy, Mr. Thomas, hold on. Mr. Shebel.
Yes, sir. At the last board meeting, the board authorized the contract to design the Sparta Fire Station. So that's just been issued. There's 6 months to do that. Once that's done, then we've got the information we need to get permitting. We're probably between 60 and 90 days between VDOT and DEQ. Then I've got to advertise and be on the street for about 5-6 weeks, wait for the bids, and then I've got to go through that analysis and then bring that to the board to authorize a contract. So we're looking right at between 10 to 12 months for the board to move forward.
We started that a year ago.
That's what I'm saying. We were saying this time last year we'd be building in 22, and we're not.
Yeah, we just didn't say what you said. You said it. I didn't.
So Mr.
One of you guys was at the podium, and I said,
I was not here that night. That happened when I wasn't present.
Mr. Cully.
I probably would have been going, no, I don't agree with that December date.
And I agree with you, Mr. Cully. The answer to your question is more political than you just kind of give us the facts, and I
Correct. You
appreciate
could-
that.
We
And
figure out a way that you could maybe
Right.
save 3 billion in this, but you'd have to commit to borrowing that
Right.
back for Sparta next year.
Right. And I appreciate that. And that gives us,
And that's what he's saying.
and that gives us an option, and that also gives us an opportunity to look at it from a more practical point of view. It gives us an opportunity to see what our revenue base is, as well as things do come online and what's coming down the pike. So I think it's a smart place to be. Certainly, I understand Mr. Seeley's position, and I think we all do. But you know, if it happens to you once, certainly, you know, don't want it to happen again. So I do understand that position. Nobody wants to be in that position. But I also want to be very practical in terms of funding and use of money and financing. What is the best route for the citizens of the county? Certainly, sometimes it doesn't feel like doesn't feel equal all the time, but in this case, I'm saying I think it's what's best for the county to delay it and go ahead and let's get the Carmel Church station moving. But that's just my opinion. It takes 4 of us to do anything. We agreed on the borrowing before. It takes 4 of us to change it.
It's not an either or proposition. We're saying we're going to do.
Today it is.
Well,
we want to do it now.
Yeah, but it's
long term is not either or.
Right. It's not an either or in the long term. We're going to do Sparta. We've got Sparta land and all that. So
right.
It's not one versus the other.
No, I'm not saying that. Just for this moment in time, it's either we continue down the road that we are now.
Well, for this moment in time, we're gonna decide which projects we're gonna do next year, but we're still gonna do them next year is the plan.
So what are we proposing exactly? Mr. Kelly? I'm looking at the list of things. What are we cutting for or postponing as a better
postpone to
term.
next year. We're really not recommending to be cut, just cut out of this borrowing. So the 2.13 that you would move to for not borrowing for Sparta, but you also have money left over. Tamika's better at being able to figure this out than I am.
Do the whole amount or a portion of it?
How are you still going to do the study?
We're going to reimburse ourselves for what we paid for the land, and then we got to pay for all the work Joey needs to do the design and get the permits. So another $400,000.
I just can't believe it takes 6 months to design a metal building. I don't understand that. It doesn't make any sense.
But it's our contract. So
I mean, what are we doing? We're paying somebody 6 months to design a metal building that comes prefab with stamped drawings to be put up. I don't get it. I don't understand.
But Mr. Seeley, they're not.
It's supply and demand.
Nobody wants to do anything.
Mr. Shebel, again, I think you're doing the best you can do, and we appreciate that. And certainly we want things, certainly I do also want things done quicker if we can possibly do it. In this case, you're at their mercy, basically, and we appreciate that. Mr. Cully, you were saying about
partial aerial ladder truck. You'd be removing 525,000. Am I reading that right? Removing. Mm-hmm. And then you would remove the additional funds from Sparta for the borrowing was 2.1 million, 1,030,000. And then we reallocate remaining Sparta funds we already borrowed of $1,121,500. So we wouldn't have to borrow that for Carmel Church because we'd reallocate that to Carmel Church. Then we'd come back next year and borrow what we need for Sparta based on the design.
That's 3.8 million.
Yeah, if we took 400 off, we would 3.3 million you could save in this borrow.
I got 3.8.
Right, but we need 400,000 more to get all the way through.
Gotcha, and you need right. So it's 3.3.
Does that give you enough to do all the study for Sparta
They did
and plans
everything
and
he wants for
stuff?
Sparta
Yeah,
and get
he
it
said
out to bid.
that was the
and
other
design and
400
everything.
came back.
Would it be worthwhile to go ahead and bid out the site work? That way we create a pad and get that
I
done?
don't, that's all part of design.
Yeah, that's part of design, but it's the first step before we put the building on it.
Correct. But they got the design to know what that is.
But that you can do out of the fund balance and then pay the
No,
fund balance.
site work's gonna be several $100,000.
But I'm saying you could do that out of the fund balance and then pay the fund balance
Right.
back when we do the borrowing.
True.
So if it comes,
On those.
as soon as it's ready, we say, yeah, we got
If
the,
we're ready in 6 months to go start moving dirt,
thank you.
We could.
Right.
You could, anything like that you wanted to start, we've done a reimbursement resolution to
Right.
pay ourselves back. So I'm already planning on paying the fund balance back, the 90 that we paid for the land. And so we can pay ourselves back with the bond proceeds.
Okay.
So those kinds of uses of the fund balance are what he was talking about that the bond people don't have a problem with because it's one-time money, you paid yourself back.
Right.
It's good, but we have enough in the fund balance. If we could get ready to do site work next spring, we can do that.
okay. That makes me more comfortable if we're.
I'm not trying to cancel. or
No, I
recommend
know. I
by
just-
any stretch
I
you
just-
cancel. I'm just giving you a theory
Yeah.
of what we could say if that's what the board wants to do. We're not recommending that you do that.
Right, understand. Mr. Whiteman, Ms. Long has a question for you, and then we'll come back.
Sorry, Kevin, get you up from your nap. How is the supply chain for building materials right now? Do you think it's going to get better? Because I know they're expensive now. I just went to pick up something the other day and.
Yeah, I think supplies are getting better. Perfect example, windows are coming sooner, windows and doors, garage doors, which used to be 3 to 4 or 5 months out are coming on time. So yeah, I see the supply chain getting better and I see pricing dropping. Perfect example, Mr. Black, we did a deck for him and that whole package dropped $2,000. Mr. Underwood, yeah. So I see it getting lower cost and a supply chain open.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, so board, we do have an opportunity to discuss this and give direction to county admin and Davenport.
What was the final number, Mr. Colley?
3.3 million.
Subtract 3.3.
3.8, and we need 500. The last number is 3.3. 130, 525, 2.655, and 1.325.
Should be 3,376,500. I just took 400,000.
That's the number. With the
That's the
savings.
reduction from the 9.48.
That's correct.
So what's the final number?
And we will make that a round number when we'll bring it back to you.
Can you give it to me again? Can you give it to me again?
But that included the 2 point something for utilities.
8 million.
8,600,000. And the things that we are deferring again are the Sparta additional funds. Right.
It's the Sparta additional funds, 2.13 million. It's the aerial ladder truck, which is the reduction that we don't need right now, 525.
525, not 600, wasn't half.
525,000. And then reallocating Sparta borrowed funds, 1.125. I'm sorry. Okay, 721,500.
All right. And
I had 1.125. Where did I get that from?
We're gonna actually do the 400,000 out of that.
Oh, out of that. Okay.
Yes, sir.
And I had 130 from someplace.
130 was the
To me, 130 was the
school grounds maintenance stuff.
I I had 130.
She didn't have that in there, but
Hey, we can change it, whatever we need to change, because we just spent 400,000 that wasn't budgeted.
And we've already got the funds for the study and the permitting for Sparta. And that's all started. So we've got 6 months to 8 months to a year of stuff for Sparta to get that going.
that's the 400. Yes, ma'am.
Two school transportation vehicles in there?
School grounds maintenance
It's in
or
plus
transportation.
transportation.
Yeah.
Those are those vehicles. They used to get patrol cars when we had Fords, but once we went to the all Dodges and ran out of giving them Fords, the Crown Vics, they didn't have the room in the back of those. And those are the ones they haul kids to St. Joe's Villa and other special schools all over the place. So those cars are on the road most school days. And so they started wearing them out. So we started buying them a few each year because there's multiples of those on the road. But anyway, that was in their CIP. So
You're buying 2 cars for $105,000. 2 cars for $105,000.
I'd have to go back to the budget and see what those were.
Because I'm pretty sure we can get SUVs now
Yeah.
for.
They pay us for that.
Mr. Cully,
That's back in there. Explain that.
So yes, so it's a transportation and then a student support vehicle. So 2 vehicles total. And then for their grounds crew, they are expanding their grounds crew. So that's for grounds equipment for the 130. However, whatever money that we borrow for them, they actually pay us back. So we're not actually paying for the debt service on those items.
But okay, wait a minute. Somebody that I'm giving money to is going to pay me back?
We are borrowing the debt for them, and then we pay for the vehicles. However, we book a journal to post that they're actually paying they're paying the money to us out of their budget.
I understand what you're saying.
So money that we're giving them, they're giving us back for the usage of the borrowing.
Yeah, but they're giving us back what we already gave them.
Yes.
Yeah, that was an extra give back in there. I understood what you were saying. Thank you very much.
And one of those, the other vehicle is like a maintenance vehicle, so that's probably a truck.
I'm sorry.
we're talking, we're going to, at the next meeting, we're going to be talking about bonuses. Is that correct?
Yes.
That's going to be on the agenda. Because I was one of the people that talked about, trying to give bonuses, but what irritates me now, we sit here and we have this in the budget, and they give $600,000 in bonuses after the budget, and we do 300. That's $900,000 that we could use for some of the items here, which again tells me we're doing something wrong.
These things are in their CIP budget, not in their operational
I
budget.
understand,
So
but dollars are dollars.
No, I agree. And so that's certainly something at budget time,
Right.
they asked for way more than that. I mean, they had $1.5 million, $2 million worth of CIP things. These were just the things I funded that we would borrow for. We gave them cash for server and stuff, the switches. We give them every year for some computers, just cash, because they wear that stuff out. Right. And this was more than what I had cash for, so that was recommended to be borrowed, but it didn't anywhere near what they requested.
I understand, but from my perspective, I look at it and say, well, we had money that we budgeted, and we could possibly give employees a bonus just to say thank you. But looking at where we are and what we're trying to do here, we all have to give some in order to make this work. So if we all put in together, we can do more than one entity coming together to take care of needs.
One thing, if they had saved $5,000 in leftover money and returned it to us, that's something that we could fund this moving forward as a one-time capital expense.
And I understand that they're afraid that we're not going to, we don't give it back to them. That's the impetus for doing what they did. They feel that we wouldn't give it back to them, and we've, money that's been left in the reversion fund, they feel they haven't gotten 100% back. So I can understand them being a little tender when it comes to that. But when you look at this, it says that we're doing something wrong here because we shouldn't be talking about giving bonuses when we really need some of this stuff to operate the county and do it well. And I think that should be our first priority. You know, human capital is there. I think we pay our folks well. I just want to sometimes say thank you if we have money budgeted, but clearly looking at this here, we've got some very tight windows in terms of finance.
May I say one last thing?
Yes, sir, Mr. Thomas.
One last thing. We borrowed or we spent $400 and some thousand at our last meeting for school projects, lights, something else,
Ball fields,
ball field, that kind of
soccer
stuff.
field.
My point is not to pick on any one entity because I tried to pick from all of them, but we've now come close to what Mr. Rogers has said is our borrowing window. So I wanted everybody to say, we're going to cut something back. I mean, we're all sacrificing.
Right. I'm not.
Some more than others. So that's why I said these school items. That's why I questioned sheriff vehicles. We gave back the ladder truck, or at least half of it. You know, we all need to make decisions. And I think some of us have to say, I got a ball field and lights. Maybe I don't need grounds crew equipment, or I can get grounds crew equipment later or something like that. That's all I'm trying to say.
Right, I understand.
So while we're saying, what is this Company 10 upfit? I mean, it's $250,000.
It's two main things. The majority of that 150,000 is everything that has to go into Carmel Church Station. That is a station from the ground up. We don't have anything that goes in that building, and that is the majority of that. The second part of that is a station alerting system. So, so that each of the bedrooms would have the ability to be alerted individually. We would go to a digital voice system over the 911 center.
So and we need to spend that now? Another 250,000?
I mean, we would, if the building is not going to be built until, Joey, next fiscal year? Carmel Church. You could delay that borrowing until next year. That's everything for the inside of the building, though, essentially. But
I mean, why would we borrow money for inside of a building that won't be ready for another year?
that's a valid point.
Some of that might be get put in the foundation or underneath the slab too. I mean, not the equipment, but like the conduit and things like that.
Yeah, but that should be in.
That should be a part of a different package.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
This is more your actual.
Mr. Shebo, can we do that?
Yeah,
or is it more problem?
Or do I have to go back and drill the foundation out when I put it in?
So right now, the contractor has 18 months to complete the fire station. He said he'll be complete right now in his schedule. He's showing us November. So while some of this work we'll be doing before we put sheetrock up to make it a clean job and be done. So we're probably, I'd have to go back and look at the schedule in my office, but we're probably putting sheetrock up come June. So if you're going to borrow before June, then you're fine. But if not, or if you're going to pay out a fund balance.
Yeah, fund balance.
Oh, we can pay out a fund balance and pay it and put it back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's just take that out.
All right. But we have the understanding in either case, if we need the money, we'll take it out of the fund balance. Which is 23 million?
That's 3.5 million.
Okay. Ms. Smith, would you remove another 250? Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am. No,
250. 250.
250,000 for the alarm system.
10, no.
Having to take a school stuff.
Oh, that's this.
Yes. Want me to write on this?
8,300,000.
I'm just going to correct.
62,000.
Yeah, and then
518.
Okay.
It's some of that, so we just put.
Do we need just a motion, Mr. Cully, or do we need a resolution? And
No, go ahead.
No, not tonight. What I want to do is get a number, put it out there, and you can even tweak it at the meeting, like when we bring it back. Stephen's probably going to be here for that meeting. We just need to know what the borrowing number will be that night. Tonight, I just need a ballpark so we can get we don't want to go above that number.
What'd you say, Ms. Smith, again? 8
So
million?
whatever I walk out tonight, I don't want to go above.
8,362,000.
8.5.
plus cost.
8.367.
8.5.
Plus cost, yeah.
Yeah, let's just round numbers, fine, because we can tweak it for the resolution. What I want to be able to send out is a request for proposal that says not to exceed 8.5.
Right.
But if we award it, if we recommend it to a certain bank and we come back to them and say we're going to do 8.1, they're okay. But
With the
if we go
exact
back and say
number, right.
9.1, we might have to, they may go, they might do it, they might not.
Okay.
So I want a number tonight that we won't go above.
So all right. We don't need a motion to that effect. We just
No.
direct him to
Well,
go
I
ahead.
think I need a motion
All
for
right.
this.
So just for clarification,
Motion to adjourn.
I'm just kind of curious, just to go over this, what exactly are we, final, what is the idea to cut out?
okay, so if
Company,
I'm,
yeah. So
Y'all,
company 10, 250.
right,
Sparta Fire Station 2130. Part of the aerial ladder truck 525. What else am I missing over there? We're good. So that'll reduce the Carmel Church piece because we're reallocating funds that we already have borrowed in the past to the tune of $1 million plus
1.125.
721. So that'll take into account that we have the 400,000 for Sparta's permitting and plans design.
we didn't cut the schools.
So that's 4 things.
Right, didn't cut the schools.
Adjustments.
You didn't cut the schools. I'm asking a question. We talked about, but we didn't get a consensus on any schools.
I'll be honest with you, Mr. Chairman.
Leave it.
I don't mind discussing it, but I don't feel like this should be a discussion without their input involved in it. Because I think, why is it in there to begin with? Because it was budgeted. Yes. I don't feel comfortable taking that because we can control our
And
own.
they're paying it, right? They're paying for both pieces?
Yeah,
It's coming out of their budget.
yeah.
But we give them the money. But we did budget it and approve it and told them we were doing it.
That's fine.
And I told them we were fine. They knew we were going to find
I'm
it.
going to make a motion to that effect, 8.5. Even though we don't need one, just to close discussion.
So the board understands that Davenport's gonna go back and look at the 8.5 number and come back on 27th?
We're going to do a request for proposal that'll come back to you with the recommended bank
On the 27th,
on the October 11th.
October 11th, okay.
October, we need a couple weeks
Okay.
to get it out. We'll come back to you with a bank. Here's the number. Here's the interest rate. Here's our estimated debt service based on 8.5 million
Okay,
plus the utilities.
okay.
So it'll basically be an update of this presentation with the.
Everybody understand that, Mr. Forehand, you're good with, Mr. Seal, I know you're not good, I'm not gonna ask you. Ms. Long,
I'm fine as long as we're straight that next year we finish
Right.
paying for the ladder truck and we finish the other of the construction funds for Sparta. Once we get all the permits in, we could start on that.
Yep. And
And what was the other thing we stopped?
And you'll need the balance of the 250 for
250,
the
right, yes.
Carmel Parks as
For the,
well.
for the,
Understanding that if those things pop up.
they got a fund balance, yes.
And have fund balance fall back on. Okay.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Look forward to speaking with you on the 11th.
I'm going to bring Steve in, so be gentle with him.
All right. We still have a closed session, gentlemen. Oh, no, we don't. I thought we had, the solar, oh, no. Oh. What's that? Right, okay. I thought that was, all right.
I didn't even see.
For CC, so for solar? Okay. Well, we don't have closed meeting, we just, right. Any closing board comments, Mr. Forehand? Mr. Black? Mr. Sealy? Mrs. Long? Mr. Thomas? And I have none. Motion to adjourn? So move. All in favor, say aye.
Uh,
We adjourn.